Greetings and welcome back to Doctor Who Revisited, where I go through every single episode of Doctor Who from 1963 all the way to 2022 and review them. And this next one, let's just get this out of the way, is another missing episode. It's the Moonbase, and you know what? It's a good one. It's one of the gooder ones. I know I usually say that with a lot of the missing episodes, a lot of the times I can understand why they were thrown out. I can't really say that I do for this one. I mean, it is another Cyberman story. It is the Cyberman Return story. Not only is it the second Cyberman story in the show overall, but it's also, weirdly enough, the second Cyberman appearance in the same season. So, like, when the Daleks were first introduced, you had to wait a full season to see them again. Not with the Cybermen for some reason. It looks like the people at the BBC kind of knew what they had with this new monster. Now, the thing about the Patrick Troughton era is, I think, probably unjustifiably so, that era of Doctor Who is remembered particularly more for the monsters that it introduced, and not so much for the Doctor, in a weird way. Which is kind of weird because, you know, first time that the Doctor regenerates, first time that there's a new actor trying to bring himself into the role. Now, I still do love the Patrick Troughton Doctor as a whole. It's just, you know, I think with a lot of the Patrick Troughton era stories, the stories, and more specifically the monsters and the aliens, were a lot more memorable than him as the Doctor, despite the fact that a lot of the core essentials of who the Doctor is were introduced in this era. In particularly, fondly enough, the Doctor just happens to have spacesuits lying around the TARDIS for whatever reason. Now, I know that in the modern series there is this iconic spacesuit that was first introduced in The Impossible Planet and the Satan Pit, which then sort of came back multiple times and went on to become the signature, iconic, recognizable spacesuit for the Doctor and friends. In the classic era, we had these other spacesuits that were used by the second Doctor, Jamie, Ben, and Polly, and you know what? As spacesuits, they look pretty alright. I mean, they look really good, they look really nice. I dare say they look a lot better than the spacesuits that the other people in this story have, but that's kind of really nitpicking. As far as spacesuits go, I kind of like them. As for the story itself, this is another case of picking up where the previous story left off, when the Doctor wanted to prove to Ben, Polly, and Jamie that he can actually pilot the TARDIS the way he wants to, and not how the TARDIS wants to fly, and he decided to take them all to Mars, which, you know, he did get them into space. Just, you know, not to Mars, to the moon. Much closer, if you will. But either way, I love Jamie's reaction to that, because, again, remember, this is early days for Jamie. Jamie is still a brand new companion, relatively speaking, and still stuck within his ways of 18th century Scotland, not realizing that it is possible to travel to the moon when you have a spaceship like the TARDIS. And I like his reaction, but he pretty much very quickly readjusts himself and is like, as soon as he wears the spacesuit and starts moonwalking, if you pardon the pun, when he starts actually walking on the moon with his friends, he starts to realize where he is and what's happening, he just goes along with it. And that's really one of my favorite parts about Jamie himself as a character, is that he's from, relatively speaking, a distant past, and yet he's thrown into these weird sci-fi situations of the future and other planets and aliens and creatures he never even could have conceived. And he just takes it in his stride. Like, it is a bit of a culture shock for him initially, but then he just goes along with it. He understands that he translates what he sees into concepts that his mind can understand, and that really is what makes him a great character. And again, the idiocy of killing off Katerina after her first story, because they felt like they would have to keep explaining to her everything because she's from a different time and they wouldn't fit well within the space setting of the show. And I can rant about that all day long, but I think they really nailed it with Jamie. They proved that these things are possible with these Doctor Who companions. Now back to the story itself, it's generic Doctor Who story. I mean, taking place, relatively speaking, in the near future or semi-distant future, only a couple of decades off from when I'm recording this. Obviously, closer to 100 years since they first broadcast the episode. But either way, I mean, it still sort of makes sense with the way technology is progressing. And remember, again, this is still the 1960s. The space race was at its highest. So, the idea that one day a space station will be built on the moon for controlling climate changes and weather changes within a world that's still facing, as a matter of fact, climate changes today, it's not too far-fetched. It's not too crazy of an idea. Yeah, it wasn't too forward-thinking. It wasn't like thinking that we'd have flying cars and hoverboards in 2015 like Back to the Future. But to be fair to the people behind Back to the Future, they knew it was ridiculous when they made that movie, and they didn't really try to predict what the future was going to look like. So, gotta give them a little bit of credit. The other characters in the story, not surprisingly, a distinct lack of female presence in the episode, which is a problem that a lot of 60s properties do suffer from, unfortunately. Again, the bit of a lack of diversity. I think the only diversity in the episode is that one of the people in the Moonbase is French, and even then that's not really too big of a stretch. But that aside, you get over that once the story itself starts to pick up. There's a mystery, there's something mysterious going on this Moonbase, people getting sick, and have these weird markings all over their body, and they start dropping one after another. You don't know what's going on, and you kind of try to figure out the plot, figure out the mystery at the same time that the main characters do, including the Doctor. And again, going back to Jamie, I love that when he sees a Cyberman for the first time, the first thing that comes to him is something from his own people's mythology, like the Phantom Piper. I think that's what he called it. So, yeah, I like, again, that he keeps translating these weird, outlandish concepts into something that he can understand. Weirdly enough, Polly doesn't really recognize a Cyberman when she sees one, and it takes her a while for her to figure out that the thing that tried to kidnap Jamie and starts kidnapping all the other people is a Cyberman. But that kind of leads me into another point. They changed the way the Cybermen looked. Now, I'm going to be honest. Personally, as a personal thing, I prefer the original look of the Mondasian Cybermen from the 10th Planet. This isn't to say that they are my favorite design of the Cybermen. Just, out of the two from the 60s, out of the two that were introduced in this season in particular, I prefer the 10th Planet Cybermen over the Moonbase Cybermen from everything, from the way that they looked and right down to the voice. Now, I will say this. I am aware that the people in the original Mondasian Cyberman costumes in the 10th Planet kept fainting due to lack of oxygen and dehydration and the heat that they had to endure wearing those heavy costumes. So I can understand why they changed the costumes a bit. I'm just saying, visually, those ones looked a lot better. And I do like what they did with the voice, where they open their mouths and then the voice comes out from off camera. Now, they sort of do something similar in this episode. It's just that in their metallic mouth, there's a little flap that keeps opening up, and a little light that comes on. Whatever. It's aesthetical change. It doesn't really affect the story overall. The story itself, again, I will say that this is really where the companions begin to shine, and in my opinion, really one of the episodes that highlights the strength of Ben and Polly as characters, especially Polly, with her figuring out how to defeat the Cybermen, with the whole that a big chunk of their bodies are made of plastic, so she starts mixing up a couple of different chemicals together into a concoction that she throws on them, and then the Cybermen just melt. There's another really good moment and this is sort of delving into the exploitation of women in the 60s, of women can only do one thing, and not a lot of good female characters written. However, the writers, I believe this episode was also written by Keith Pedler and Jerry Davis, the original creators of the Cybermen. which, you know, they did do this with the 10th planet, of Polly's status as a secretary actually becoming an advantage, where she's like, oh, I can make coffee for people, and in the process, making coffee for all the people in the South Pole base, she gets to learn what's going on. Something very similar happens in this episode, where the Doctor suggests that she makes everyone coffee, and because she made everyone coffee, that's how they figured out how the plague was being transmitted, through the sugar, because not everyone takes their coffee with sugar. So once again, Polly's status as a secretary and making coffee to people was actually useful for the plot. That is a good use of character. And, you know, I don't really know what else to tell you. That is a really, it's good writing, I suppose. As for the Doctor himself, I think he had a lot of really good moments, like this, the evil in the universe that must be fought speech that he gave, and when he deduces that the plague is being transmitted through the sugar, and all kinds of other moments. I love the moment where the Doctor realizes that the Cybermen are in the room with them, and then one of the Cybermen just takes off the tarp and just starts lumbering over, and that's one of the cliffhangers. I like that. But lots of good moments. I love how they stopped the Cybermen. In a way, this episode does mirror the 10th planet a lot, with the whole, there's an initial wave of Cybermen invading, they get defeated, and then another wave of Cybermen comes, and they're just literally walking on the moon. And I love how they defeated the second wave of Cybermen, just removing the gravity, the artificial gravity, and letting all the Cybermen just drift off into outer space, and I don't know, the sun, which is the biggest source of gravity in the general area. So yeah, I like stuff like that about the episode, and you know, it's good, it's fun. Obviously, it's another missing episode, so for this one, I managed to find an animated reconstruction of it, and in there you really can tell the differences between the spacesuits and from the Moonbase spacesuits and the Doctor's spacesuits. And really, it's nice that there is an animated reconstruction to that. It's better than the regular one of just a static image with random words at the bottom. So yeah, it's a good episode. Shame it's missing, and yeah, it's one of those episodes that I do remember very fondly, particularly with the way that they used the companions, and in particular Polly in this episode. And yeah, I think that's about it. That's all I can say for this one. Yeah. So, oh yeah, one other thing that I want to touch on is, once again, the ending of the final part of the episode, the serial, I should say, is a tease to what the next episode is going to be, where we see on the TARDIS monitor this giant crab claw on the scanner or monitor or whatever, which is a lead-in to the next episode, which is the Macra Terror. Can't wait to talk about that one. So how about I'll just wrap up this review so I can get down to recording the next one for the Macra Terror. So thank you for watching. Let me know what you think about this episode, the Moonbase, another Cyberman episode, one of many Cyberman episodes from the 60s. Interestingly enough, the Cybermen were introduced relatively late into the Doctor Who game, and yet still somehow managed to catch up to the Daleks with the number of stories that they had. So, yeah, that's it for today, and I'll see you some other time. Goodbye for now. Hi there. Thank you for watching the video. And if you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and tell your friends. I'll see you next time.